All right, folks. This week I am joined by Steve Cotter, who is an absolute legend in the fitness industry. And I've been coaching for 12 years, and Steve was very, very active back then and has just been a real prolific trainer, has traveled the world. So I'm really excited to really dive in and learn about all of his experiences. So, Steve, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to maybe explain what you do and how you got into the industry?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm Steve Cotter. I'm based in San Diego, California, is my home, and I'm 53 years old. I've been involved in uh, physical training, martial arts, physical education for more than 40 years now. Been working in fitness as a coach since about 1985. I was 15 years old. So coming up on 40 years of skin in the game. So my primary work is involved in, I'm the director of the IKFF, which is the International Kettlebell and Fitness Federation. Sorry about that. So the IKFF is the International Kettlebell and Fitness Federation. And through the IKFF, I provide physical education and trainings and certifications, primarily revolving around kettlebell training as well as body weight mobility. Mostly catering towards other fitness professionals, so personal trainers and coaches who want to elevate their knowledge in kettlebells and mobility and have a standardized practice. So through the IKFF, there's practical exams at each level that the student has to successfully complete to demonstrate, high level of competency. My background is starting when I was 12 years old. I was deeply immersed into the martial art practice, Chinese martial arts originally. And that sort of gave me my start in the structured, training. And from that, in my late 20s, I realized that I wasn't going to teach Kung Fu for the rest of my life. That was my first profession, starting when I was 15. As a teenager, I thought, well, I'll be doing this forever. And then in my late 20s, I decided to go in a different direction. I went to university and got my degree in kinesiology, which is essentially physical education. Coming out of that in early 2000s, I went into fitness as a trainer. And that coincides with the sort of formation of what I would call the modern kettlebell movement. So kettlebells were just starting in the Western world at that time. And I was one of the first adapters to the kettlebell. And I saw the synchronicity between kettlebell training and martial arts, in that it's a whole body, holistic type of training method where we're training movements rather than muscles. So that really appealed to me, and I immersed myself in kettlebell training. And then starting around 2004 and beyond, for the next 10 to 12 years, I started creating various digital products. Well, back at that time, it was DVDs. I started creating DVDs, in particular one called the Encyclopedia of Kettlebell Training, which was a really extensive body of work. And that also, around that time YouTube was just starting. So a lot of those videos or clips from those DVDs went onto YouTube, and I started getting a global audience. People, telling me they really enjoyed the work I was doing, and started getting invited, all around the world to do seminars. So starting in around 2006, I started traveling internationally and teaching kettlebell seminars and kettlebell certifications. I created IKFF in 2008. And then from 2008 until the onset of the pandemic, which in the US was like early 2020, in that approximately 14 or 15-year period, I was traveling everywhere. I taught live seminars in 70 different nations in that period of time. So all throughout Europe and, Asia, Australia, North America, South America, Africa. And, that was very, a significant part of my life, traveling all the time. Then the pandemic came and there was a moratorium on all the traveling. So at that point, I transitioned over to doing online courses over Zoom. And I continue to this day to do that. So that's I was actually the first person to start bringing kettlebells all around the world and in many of these different countries. Was the first, international presenter in, countless different places. And, it's tremendous experience, tremendous, life experience, as well as teaching experience, working with people in different cultures, different languages. In addition to that, as far as my family life, I have 3 children. They're all grown now. I have 2 daughters and a son. So that's really, really significant and part of my life. And the kids are all doing really well. And as far as my personal practice, I'm really heavily involved in the martial arts. Almost 6 years ago, I got involved with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I continue to train very diligently in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, both in the, in the self-defense as well as in the competition sport. And, my work is really a amalgamation of all these different influences: the martial arts, the kettlebell, the body weight, mobility, the flexibility. Also the breathing training through my Chinese Kung Fu training. I was really involved in the Qigong, which is, deep breathing and slow movements for stimulating circulation, health building. So that gives some information about who I am, what I do, what I've been doing. And I'm definitely a person who leads by example. I teach what I know, and I practice what I teach. I practice what I preach. So keeping myself, really active and really busy, even in my 50s now, continue to work at a high level and never stopped.
Yeah, mate. I mean, your career is just insane. Like, especially in a really good way. Like because the way I feel, I started coaching in 2012. I was born in 88. So you'd been coaching for 3 years before I was born. So 38 years, which is amazing. And something I always think about is like the fitness industry is so young. So like there's very few guys I can look up to like yourself who are kind of in their 50s who've had a really successful career as opposed to like medicine or law or teaching or whatever. So for you, there must have been basically nobody, was there, like ahead of you who you could see as like who had like a successful long-term career, or were there people who you were kind of ahead of you?
I would say that, if we look at fitness and kind of go back to the history, and, obviously it's a global phenomenon, but USA has always been sort of the mecca of fitness. But if we go back, into history or modern history, at least in the 20th century, most of what we call fitness, or what we were calling fitness, was coming out of the bodybuilding protocols. So, most famously was Arnold Schwarzenegger and the work he did with Joe Weider to promote bodybuilding. And then coming out of, the Arnold, when he was the bodybuilding champion, a lot of what was being called fitness was essentially, people looking in the bodybuilding books or the magazines and following these bodybuilding protocols, trying to build the biceps, and the chest and the legs and this type of thing. And then in the 60s, there became a big movement towards running. There was work by Dr. Kenneth Cooper with the Cooper Institute in Dallas. There was a famous book called Running by a guy named Jim Fixx. And so a lot of people at that time, and this was, started before I was born. I was born in 1970, but there became a lot of attention on running because many people, they weren't so much into the bodybuilding, or they would injure their body, or for whatever reason they didn't enjoy being in the gym atmosphere. It was kind of, a lot of meatheads type of thing. And you get a pair of running shoes and off you go. So it was pretty easy entry, and running became, quite popular. There's a lot of research coming out as far as the aerobic benefits and cardiovascular benefits to running. And so then in really the early 80s probably was when what I call the first wave of functional fitness started. And so, in that time, the thought process is that, well, let's train more integrated. Let's train the whole body. Let's train movements rather than muscles. And then I was, to more specific to your question, I was at the forefront of what I would call the second wave of functional fitness or functional training. And that was the implementation of handheld tools, which are now quite prolific, most notably the kettlebell. And so I was one of the early adapters of the kettlebell, and that really changed fitness, extensively and for everybody. And then, along with the kettlebells, you started having things like Indian clubs and club bells. And now, of course, we have the mace, and you had TRX came out in that kind of era. And what we call the suspension training. You had the Bosu balance trainer came out, right around that same time, early 2000s. So as far as what I do personally, I was never really looking too much to fitness for inspiration, because there wasn't really anybody doing this stuff. The only really person before me in terms of kettlebell was Pavel Satsaline. So, Pavel and I connected, and we had a relationship where we worked together for several years. And most of my inspiration was really coming through the martial arts, actually. And that was always my frame of reference, where, starting at 12 years old, I was training martial arts daily. And that involved more of the, body weight conditioning, hitting the bag, doing push-ups and horse stance and, pistol squats and these types of movements. So that was always my sort of guide. And, I was into the historic as a younger man, or as a really a teenager. I was, really into some of the historic Chinese, legends, the Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and these types of things. So although I definitely believe that teamwork makes the dream work, sometimes if you're sort of at the forefront of a new movement or a different way of doing things, you don't have particular models because it's never been done before. So in that sense, I've sort of made my own way. And the kettlebell provided me with that opportunity, was this tool, this handheld, ball with a handle. And it opened the world to me because of just time and place. It's a combination of things. There's obviously my hard work and my skill that came out of the practice and the work. That was a component. But it's also timing. And, if I was coming into the game now, I wouldn't have had as much of an impact because there's so much kettlebell now, and when I started, there was just a very small group of us. And then just doing the DVDs and the YouTube and getting sort of a global audience via the internet. And for younger or even your age and younger, you most people don't remember a time before the internet. If you're less than 40 years old, probably, or less than 35 years old. But the internet was brand new, and most of us didn't, at least for me, I didn't really get on to the internet till about 2004. And so YouTube was all brand new at that time. Facebook, was maybe didn't even start yet. There was no Instagram, there was no Twitter. You had like MySpace, but I never really played around on MySpace. So YouTube was like a major change where you could actually put your work. In my case, it was with the kettlebell, put that online, and somebody from all the way across the world could see it, and then we could start communicating, and then through the email and so on. And that's really what gave me my start, where I had DVDs and I had a website where I was selling DVDs. And then I would get emails, people saying, "Oh, I love your work. I got your DVD. It's really amazing. I want you to come out here to Barcelona. I have a gym and I'd love to do a seminar, host you here." And that's how I got started. And then I would go, and then and in those early years, starting around 2006, for example, I go to Barcelona and there's a guy that comes, he's from France, and he comes from nearby country and takes the course. And then he's like, "Oh, I want to bring you to France." So then I'd go to France, and, it just it was all word of mouth, and having, FaceTime with people, and putting my passion, putting my love and my experience into what I was doing. Fortunately, when I came into kettlebells, I had already a very extensive background in teaching through the martial arts, because when I was 15 years old, I started, teaching and was an assistant initially. And then I eventually, started taking over the school. By the time I was 19, I was running a Kung Fu school at that time with, 200 something students. So I already at a pretty young age had experience standing in front of a group and giving direction and leading through movement and explaining and breaking down. So when I went into the kettlebells, it was a new tool and a new modality, but it wasn't a new experience in terms of my ability to get in front of a group and understanding how to communicate, how to teach, and how to lead. So it's kind of just all these factors coming together. I've always had, different inspirations, but ironically, they didn't necessarily come out of fitness. I was never really inspired by bodybuilding necessarily. I was really inspired more through the martial arts.
And then what I'd be curious about, like you said, you've taught in 70 different nations. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, and you've taught for such a long period of time. So, the first question is, being from the US, being all over the world, have you seen any cultural differences with maybe strength levels, general fitness levels, mobility levels, depending on the culture, the country that you're in, or the part of the world you're in?
Yes, I would say that's definitely so. And I think more and more as time goes on, those differences are becoming less and less. And I think that's a result of globalization, where we have, because a lot of I'm also a prolific learner, which is not to suggest that, that I know that much. But I'm always interested in learning. And, so I'm constantly studying, constantly, reading, and I'm really interested in paleontology. I'm really interested in anthropology, human history. And I try to learn as much as I can as far as origins, so if we talk about cultural differences in physical attributes, much of that would have derived from nutrition primarily. Whereas certain cultures, like if you look at, Western world, Europe and US and Australia is not in the West, but in terms of the culture, there was easier and more abundant access to high protein foods. So you go to the northern, so like Scandinavian, the people are very strong, very big. You go to like the Netherlands, they're the tallest people in the world, on average. And then you go to say like the Asian countries, they tend to be smaller. Their bones tend to be smaller, not as big, not as tall, not as thick. But even among the Asian cultures, there's differences. The Koreans tend to be more muscular, as compared to say the Filipinos and so on. So you do see differences in size and strength. The Asian, again, it's general, and there can be differences from person to person. And we live in an era where there's so much politicization that it's, we have to qualify things we say because people maybe feel offended, or they may try to label you as being racist or this type of thing. And, I'm not coming from that at all. It's just observations of differences. I will say that we are all more similar than we are different. Now, we may have different color skin or different color eyes or speak different languages, or eat, have different preferences in food, or, people have different names for God and all these things. But those differences are not as important as they might be made out to be. And I think there's more similarities than different, and so I prefer to focus on the similarities. The similarities is that the people that attend my courses are very focused. They're very dedicated. They're there to learn. They're there to grow. So there's this ambition that exists pretty much across the board, wherever they're coming from. There's a work ethic there, and that's more important. So there's the saying, like in gymnastics or in stretching, you have the Chinese splits and the American splits, right? And the Chinese can do the full split, and the Americans have to do the front split because the hips are loose, or not as loose with the Westerner or with the American. I should say the USA, because the Americas is, it's not just USA, it's the North America, South America. They're all Americans, but people from this part of the world, we tend to have tightness in the hips, and that I would say it follows the just the industrialization. So the Western world, the Industrial Revolution, if you will, it started in England, and then it kind of spread throughout the Western world first. And in the Eastern world, the modernization has only occurred over the last several decades. And so we've been sitting in chairs our whole life and driving in cars, and you go to other parts of the world, less developed nations, as they're called nowadays, places like Indonesia. The grandparents probably were not sitting in chairs. They were sitting on the ground or sitting in a squat, and so the hip development over time, loss of mobility when you're sitting in the chair all the time. Then the nutrition as well. If you're eating more fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds, that's going to be a different digestive process than if you're eating a lot of dairy and a lot of animal meats. So it's going to impact the density of the bone. And there's pros and cons, because obviously bone density, that's a positive, but there's a payoff. When you have a lot of density, you also have a loss of mobility. There's not as much flexibility there. So you get stronger and bigger, but you get tighter. So you can see those differences, but as far as like before the pandemic, when I was still traveling all the time, the last market that really started opening to me was mainland China. I went many places before I ever went to China, and then starting in 2014, I started going to China and teaching seminars there. And then from there, I was going to China frequently, 3 or 4 times a year, and I would go to maybe 3 to 5 city tour each time. So I'd be there maybe 10 days. And I noticed that very quickly the Chinese were starting to catch up because it follows economics as well. Because
You
when
mean catch up in the sense that they were getting heavier or stiffer, or their
well, they were
physical
catching
ability?
up in terms of their access to information.
Hmm.
So um, the world opened up more in terms of
Hmm.
globalization. So basically what happened is the Chinese economy became a lot stronger in the cities, and so the average Chinese now had access to money and resources that their parents didn't have. And so they were able to pay for information, to bring people like myself, experts in different areas of fitness and sport, and bring coaches there to teach them the techniques. So in that sense, they were catching up in terms of the access to the new things, the best
Mm.
things. And the work ethic very strong, value for education very strong. So it's catching up in the sense of the old saying, they used to say like the weak man of Asia or the weak man of China. This is going back, like around World War II times, where the average Chinese, they didn't have access to food, and they didn't have access to any of these things, and now they do. So I think more than culture, it has more to do with economy, and the people that can afford, they're able to pay for the things that they want, for the best things. And the people that can't afford, well, in less developed parts of the world, they're just trying to work for food. They don't.
Yeah.
They're working ungodly hours for very little money, and just enough to maybe have a place to sleep, and maybe have a little bit of food each day. They're not going to be training, and they're not going to be getting on the internet, and they're not going to be having access to these things. So it follows kind of the industrialization of the world, and as nations and regions become more industrialized, they gain access to the newest information.
Yeah,
And
like the real reason behind the question was I lived in Asia, 2013, 2015, and that was when I really started looking at environmental factors and how people move, because I was this stiff as a board Irish guy in my mid 20s, couldn't sit on the ground, my knees would be sore after 5 minutes, and then or I couldn't squat, couldn't do anything. And then when I would go to a yoga class, go to a meditation retreat or something like that, all the locals could just sit for hours, no problem, squat for hours, no problem. I was like, but I just started understanding, like, when you start doing stuff every single day for your whole life, you get really good at it as well. And I was like, okay, this starts making sense now. Like you said, I've been sitting in chairs my whole life. I've never really sat in a deep squat for extended periods of time, sat on the ground for extended periods of time. And then when I started doing that every day, then my mobility, skyrocketed over the last few years as a result of that. So I just think it's very interesting looking at how cultures spend their lives and then how well they move. Because I think talking to people now, a lot of people in Western countries, they think, oh, I can't do that. Like, that's impossible. It's like, well, if you just start practicing and changing your environmental patterns, like, your movement will change and improve as well.
absolutely, we are the creature of habits, as the saying goes. What we do often is what we become, essentially.
Yeah. I'd love to jump into, like, you've been training for so long, and when people look at you, you're in amazing physical shape. But I'd like to talk about the impact of like the mental and emotional side as well, like things that maybe you've understood differently. I know for me, when I was younger, I was very focused on just the body, and now as I get older, I'm focusing more on the mind, the impact that physical activity has on my mental health. So I'd love to hear your input and what you've learned over the years in that department.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really significant. And what I teach, what I believe in my experience is I refer to it as the Holy Trinity. So I always want to point this out to students. The Holy Trinity is what I coined that term to refer to the body, mind, and breath. The Trinity of the body, the mind, and the breath. And there's a saying often associated maybe with Eastern mysticism or Eastern martial arts, the body, mind, and spirit. We've heard that term, body, mind, and spirit. And as I started going into that, and studying meditation and trying to understand that, I came to realize that body, mind, and breath for me was a much better motto, because it puts more substance into these ideas. So if we break this down, the body is the most tangible. Okay, if I say your body, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can experience it through the sensory, through the senses, right? You can touch and you can feel the body. And so we know that when we speak about the body, everyone knows exactly what we're speaking about. And so we are embodied. And when we speak about the mind, well, the mind, we generally have a good idea of what we're speaking about, but it has, it's less tangible in the sense, because, we can ask the question, what is the mind? Is it the brain? Well, we don't know for sure, right? It maybe the brain is a component, so the mind, but generally we still have an idea of what the mind is. It deals with our awareness, it deals with our consciousness. So the awareness, the understanding, the knowledge, this is associated with the mind. The body, well, everything to do with movement and tactile sensation is the body. And then the breath. Well, the breath, we also understand what the breath is, right? Because we breathe in, that's the inspiration, and we breathe out. And so when I'm teaching is that, and again, in the West, there's sort of this dissection of the body and the mind. This is part of our education, right? Part of our way of looking at the world, where, coming from the Greeks, the foundation of Western society, right, is attributed to the Greeks. And so the body and the mind, right? And so the emphasis has always been on the mind, right? Go to school, get an education, become a professional, become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, right? Train your mind. You're getting paid for what you know, for your knowledge. The manual laborer, the one who's using their body, the one that's moving the wheelbarrow or shoveling the dirt, they're going to get less pay. But they're working harder, but they're not getting as much value for their work as the one who is not working. The CEO is getting made the most, and they're doing the least amount of work or manual labor. So there's always been this kind of separation between the mind and the body. And, what I say is we need to bring the mind and the body together. Well, how do we do that? What's the mechanism? Well, the mechanism is the breath. Because let's look at a movement. And again, I'm so focused around kettlebells, can talk about kettlebells, that's a great example, but it can apply to any kind of movement. You want to do, machines, or you want to use suspension, or you want to do, barbells and dumbbells, or any movement that you're talking about. Shooting a basketball, kicking a soccer ball, football. You have the mind and the body. So when let's say I'm swinging a kettlebell, I have to be thinking about and concentrating on that movement. However, the mind can easily drift, right? It's like you're doing the movement, but you're thinking about, oh, what am I going to have for dinner? Or you're thinking about, oh man, I got in an argument with my wife or my girlfriend. I'm really mad about that. You're distracted. Or, oh my God, I have this stress. I have to pay that bill, right? So your mind or your awareness is sort of separate from your physical body and what you're doing with your movements. And so what do we focus on? What I teach is you focus on the breathing. You focus on the coordination, the timing of the breathing and the movement. And so if I'm doing a movement and I'm paying attention to the breathing, and so now your mind is on your breath, your awareness is on your breath, and your breath is synchronized with your movement. And so now we have the mind of the body and the breath. And this gives us presence. This gives us continuity, where all of you is all together at the same place and the same time doing the same thing. And that's extremely important because, there's a saying, which is not a correct saying, but there's a saying that practice makes perfect. But the more correct way of looking at it is that perfect practice makes perfect results. Okay, so you can practice something, but if you're not focused upon it, if you're thinking about other things where you're going through the movement, you're just getting a shell of the total benefit. You're not really getting the full benefit. However, if you practice, and for every repetition that you're doing, you're completely immersed and you're thinking about it and you're paying attention to it, you're going to get more value. So it's the quality is even more important than the quantity. You're better to do one perfect repetition than 100 sort of sloppy or unfocused repetitions.
That's so good, man. So that's
And
basically you just explained a really easy easy, not simple mindfulness practice. That's, I think, very easy to apply. People can practice this right away versus, there's a lot of esoteric stuff around being present and mindful. So basically, when you're doing a movement, you're doing the exercise, and then you're also focusing on the breath, and that is it.
yes, and this has to be at the forefront of all fitness, and so the first things I always start with when I'm teaching a course, whether it's a private training or whether it's a group course in live or over Zoom, is your posture and your breath. So how is my posture? How am I holding my posture? And where is my breathing? And so that needs to be at the beginning of the instruction, is how do you hold your body? That's your posture. And how do I breathe? Where do I breathe? Right? What's the timing? When do I exhale? In movements like kettlebell, we've always focused on the exhale. It doesn't mean that we don't inhale. It's that we don't focus on the inhale. We focus on the exhale. So if you do a strong, forceful exhale, the inhale is going to follow naturally because of the elasticity of the tissue. So if you forcefully contract, it's going to naturally expand through its natural elasticity of the tissues. Okay. And so, you want to understand, where is the exhale with the movement at what timing? So if it's a swing, it's or whatever the movement is, and understanding that. And common mistakes, very, very common, is the holding of the breath. not breathing or not taking enough breaths, or having a poor timing between the movement and the breath. And so that starts developing sort of a oxygen debt. You're going into oxygen debt, or you're going into where basically you cannot sustain the rhythm. You cannot sustain the rhythm when you don't have the correct timing. And so then you start being short on breath, you're playing catch up, and you go into hyperventilation where it's not sustainable. So it's really important to understand how many breaths you take in a specific movement and when to exhale during the specific movement. And then that way you're able to maintain a stable heart rate, and that allows you to sustain your movement over a longer period of time. So what I'm discussing has more to do with endurance versus if you're training max strength, like a maximal deadlift, the heaviest weight you can move for one rep. The breathing is going to be a little bit different. Sometimes breath holding may be used through part of the movement, but that's for a very short period of time. Then it's over. Maybe it takes 5 seconds to complete the lift or less. And then, you put the bell down, or you put the weight down, and now you can take a few minutes to recover. So that's different than, okay, let's say kettlebell sport, it's 10 minutes. You got to work for 10 minutes without putting the kettlebell down, without stopping. That's a completely different task. And you have to be able to breathe throughout the entire, or if you're going to run a 10K or a marathon or an ultra marathon, you can't hold your breath while you're doing that. And so that's a really common mistake, is people hold their breath. And there's always going to be an association of when you're holding your breath in movement, there's going to be an association with tension, where your body is going to feel tense, or you're going to feel restricted or limited in some way. And so it's always important to understand and have that self-awareness of what is my breath doing while I'm moving, and
as you're saying this, Steve, like I'm kind of like, I definitely usually listen to music in the gym or listen to a podcast or something like that. I think a lot of people do. So like when you train, or best practices would be to have no distraction. You're basically focusing on the movement, or would there be music in the background, or what's the best thing to do? And then what would be a good way for someone who's used to just having the music on, not really thinking at all? They just go in, sweat, and leave. So what would be best practices? And then for someone who's in that position that maybe wants to start applying what you're saying in more detail.
I definitely believe in best use and best practices. However, I also am not rigid in that. I believe there's more than one way. So there may be a such thing as what's the best practice for me, but that may be not the best practice for someone else. So it's important to understand that also in coaching, because when we speak about science or exercise science, part of that is the law of individual differences. So for me personally, yes, I don't use music, or I don't depend upon music. Sometimes if it's a group, however, there may be music in the background. And so for me, the best practice is just listening to the breath, not have any distractions, not have anything else going on. It's not to say it's bad, to each their own. So on the other hand, there may be some individuals that they feel like they need to have some music as, some inspiration to get through the workout, so if you're not going to work out, if there's no music, it's better to have music and do the training than, oh no, I'm going to be, no music, but I'm not going to train. So, I would say in either case though, it should be background in the sense that it does not dominate your attention. It does not, to where you're thinking about the words over here as opposed to thinking about what you're doing with the weight, with your breathing. So I think there's a way that you can, have some synchronicity, but it should, and again, the type of music that I might enjoy or that might inspire me might be totally different for someone else. Some people like that, really like, whatever heavy metal, crazy, rah, 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 stuff like, to me, it's not even music, but that's okay, because we don't all have to like the same things. We don't all have to, agree on the same things, but we can at least agree that we want to make progress and we're trying to improve ourselves, and so there's different flavors. You go to Baskin Robbins, it's like, what's better, chocolate or vanilla? What's better, strawberry? We're not going to argue about that. You like chocolate, I like vanilla. Okay, well, we can have what you want. So, we have to differentiate between, when we say best, a lot of times best is just a way of saying that's what I like. It doesn't mean it's the best. It's what you prefer. Yeah. So that's what I think about it. I think optimally silence, and you find, because it's really about rhythm is what it comes down to. So you need to be able to find the rhythm, and you need to be able to move in a rhythmic fashion to where your breathing is coordinated with the movement, and everything is working together. And so ideally you're listening to music that is facilitating the rhythm that you're developing in your movement practice. And that's what it should be. It should be a movement practice, because there's a skill component to training, to exercise, to work out, however you want to view that. And that skill component needs to be present. And that's the way to achieve a sustainable practice. That's a way to achieve a sustainable practice throughout the lifespan, so that when you're in your 50s and your 60s and beyond, you can still do all the same things that you've always liked to do. And what I like to say is that if I'm not going to be doing it when I'm 60, I don't need to be doing it when I'm 20. Because if there's things that you can do as a young man or a young woman, but you can't do it as an older man and woman because your body is too broken down or too injured, well, learn from that. Okay, hindsight is 2020, but that probably means that the movement you were doing when you were younger, you were injuring yourself, but your body was still anabolic enough in its, it was able to repair at a fast enough rate that you didn't notice the injury. And then over an accumulation of time, over years and thousands of bad reps, you all of a sudden it's like, oh man, my shoulder hurts, or oh, my back is hurting. I don't, but I don't remember hurting it. Well, it was incremental over time. And the youth is able to disguise these faulty practice habits to a certain degree until it can't any longer. And then it's really hard to undo the harm as we get older that we did when we're younger. So it's really important in the early stages to learn good habits. Don't do practices that are not sustainable, because there's a reason they're not sustainable. And conversely, the movements that and the practices that are sustainable, you're going to be able to do throughout your whole life. So what's the most, when I talk about universal qualities or universal habits, meaning habits that apply to everybody, not just to the athlete or not just to the young person, but to everybody, there's very few exercises or modalities that are universal. So for example, I love kettlebells and I'm deeply immersed with kettlebells, but I recognize that kettlebells is not for everybody. It may be contraindicated in some cases. Some people just don't enjoy it or don't want to do it. It's not for everybody. Just like jumping is not for everybody. If you have knee and ankle injuries, you shouldn't be jumping, doing box jumps. You know, so and this is a lot of the thought processes that I've developed over, you know, a long time, thinking about, okay, what are practices that are universal practices that apply to everybody? And it basically comes down to one thing primarily, which is breathing. Everybody breathes, and there's nothing else that everybody does, right? Not everybody will play basketball. Not everybody will power lift. Not everybody will sprint, do sprints, or jump, or do anything. But everybody will and must breathe. And so breathing is the most universal of all the practices, and it should be the foundation for everything else that we're doing. And then, you know, posture. Good posture is fundamental, although that can look different. You know, if someone is in a wheelchair, it doesn't mean that they should not maintain good posture. It just means that they're not able to stand on their feet, for example. But, you know, the core, or the, you know, the posture still needs to be in a good position, in a upright position, and to the best of our capacity. You know, so we look at breathing, we look at posture, then we look at gait. Gait is universal. Most people, they may not be able to run. A lot of people can't run, but they can, well, you know, or many people can't sprint, but they can jog. Some people can't jog, but they can walk. You know, and if you can't walk, well, then you're kind of a minority, but there's individuals that are not able to walk for whatever reason, injury or some kind of disorder. And, you know, so, but they still have to locomote. It may be with an assistance. You may need a walker. You may need crutches. You may need a wheelchair. You're still locomoting. Okay, you're still moving from, and that's part of the human experience. We've always had to move. You have to go get food, go walk across the room to the refrigerator, even, right? So, you know, those are kind of the universal ideas: breathing, posture, locomotion. And so we want to look at those things as foundational to everything else we're doing. And then it's like, okay, what is my 31 flavors? Which is my flavor that I like? Okay, I like kettlebells. I like barbells. You know, I like Pilates. I like yoga. I like, and you don't have to choose just one. You can choose multiple. But what, you know, got me off on this discussion was the idea of the skill practice. You want to always keep in mind, what is the skill that I'm developing through this workout modality that I'm favoring? Okay. You know, so if it's a deadlift, well, picking up a load off the ground and picking it up, is that a practical? Absolutely, that's a practical skill. You know, laying on a bench, pushing a weight, it may or may not be practical. The strength that comes with that, yes, it's very functional strength. So I'm not saying it's a bad exercise, but it's going to be less practical in the global sense than maybe just lifting something up off the ground from a standing position, right? So there's different, you know, degrees to that. But whatever the modality that you're practicing, you have to think about the skill. And then when you pay attention to the skill, then you pay attention to, okay, what's the breathing? What's the posture? What's the biomechanics? Right? What's the most efficient, most effective body positioning to have my body in order to get, you know, the optimal results from the time that you're putting in. And, you know, that goes much more into the functional way of, as opposed to just the aesthetic, where it's like, okay, I'm working out to look a certain way, or because I want to fit into a, you know, a pair of pants, or, you know, or a dress, or whatever it is. There's nothing wrong with that. There is a, you know, the aesthetic component is also a part of the human experience, where many, if not most, you know, do care about how they look. So I'm not going to be, you know, not going to say, oh, that doesn't matter, because that's disingenuous. But what if that's more of a result, a side benefit of the primary focus, which is the function? So if you're training for function to develop skill, then, and the physical attributes that develop with that. So, oh yeah, your cardiovascular fitness is improving because you're getting your heart rate up, and your muscle tone is improving because you're flexing and extending and contracting your muscles. You know, and oh yes, your core stability is improving because you're, you know, doing the one-legged exercise or whatever it is. There's going to be carryover, and oh, by the way, you're also looking healthier, you know. And so there's a mental component to all of that, because at the end of the day, we have to accept ourselves. We have to love ourselves, and you know, appreciate ourselves, you know. And there's a very real phenomenon that exists within society, and extensively throughout fitness, even among, you know, fitness leaders and coaches, is body dysmorphia, where people are so fixated on their appearance and their perception of their appearance. It's like, oh, you know, and you have, you know, bodybuilders that have very little fat, and they're like, oh, I'm fat, you know. Or and you have this with men and women. Traditionally, it was always associated with women, you know, and anorexia and bulimia, but we understand that it's just a prevalent with men as well. Where it's like, oh, my arms are not big enough, you know, I don't feel, you know, or whatever it is. And you know, that's something fitness definitely needs to mature, in the sense that I think, you know, in the fitness, what is called the fitness industry, which I don't like to use that term, and I don't think of it in that way, but that's a term that we hear. We hear the fitness industry, but to me, what that is the industrialization of fitness. And the industrialization occurs with other organic things, and that's a mistake, in my opinion. You know, if we're looking at the fitness industry, a lot of the business of that is coming from fear, is coming from fear tactics, or manipulation tactics. In other words, you're not good enough and you don't look good, so you need to do this, or you need to buy this program, or you need to buy this supplement, so you can be accepted by society. And I think of it completely different. What I think is that you're already perfect the way you are. You know, people talk about perfection. I use that term. Well, we have this belief, or we have this way of thinking of the world. We as a society is, you know, the very common saying, nobody's perfect, right? We always hear that. Nobody's perfect and it's impossible. You can never. Well, if in that way of looking at it, it's true. Okay. But what I say, what I believe, is that we're already perfect. Okay. So the disconnect, or the difference, is in how we're defining perfection. Perfection is not a static thing where it's like, oh, there's this perfect thing that is outside of me, and you know, I can never be that because I am flawed, because I make mistakes, you know. Well, it's a process. Okay, it's a perfection process. And so the point is that the way we are right now, that's who we are. And it doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that there's not room for improvement, but we can move from where we are, and we can move forward and closer to that idea. We always have to have this idea out in front of us of some better way, you know. And again, we can limit it to just fitness for the sake of this conversation, but it can apply to any facet of our human experience. The point, you know, because if that doesn't exist, then what are we here for, right? Then we're just kind of sitting around waiting to die or something. Like there has to be some motivation to improve ourselves in some way. And this is part of the power of fitness and of, you know, what I call physical education. Really is, it's a possibility that I can, right here right now, I can improve myself, and I don't need anything else. I just need my body. I just need my body and my determination that I'm going to do something. And I can start squatting. I can do some push-ups. I can do a plank. I can, you know, if I have a pull-up bar, I can jump up and, you know, or whatever. I can stand on one leg and balance, or I can just sit here and wave my hands through the air and breathe slowly and try to feel the energy moving, right? So you don't have to buy anything. You can go right where you are at this moment, and you can put money in the bank of you know, putting in deposits. So, you know, the point being is that there needs to be more understanding within fitness of acceptance of who you are and where you are right now, and be respectful of that. And it's not to say, you know, and so there's this movement going on. It's sometimes referred to as body positivity. Um, you know, and I think, like often happens in America, because America is so corporatized, and, you know, I'm from here, USA, I should say. I'm from here. I love my country. You know, I'm not, but we have to be honest enough to understand the strengths and weaknesses wherever you are, because every country, just like every person, has strengths and has weaknesses, and does some things well and does other things poorly. And it's extremely arrogant and myopic to think that, oh, we're the best, and we're the greatest, and, you know, and what does that even mean? It means you stop growing, you stop learning, you know. And that applies to the individual, it applies to the team, it applies to the society, it applies, keep bringing it out, to the nation, right, to the partnerships of the nations, and so on. So ultimately it involves everybody, and we can bring that down to just the individual within the whole. And so, you know, the idea of, a lot of times what happens in USA, in my observation, is you have good ideas or pure ideas that become bastardized, they become corrupted. You know, and so this body positivity is something that we have, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. And it's sort of what we see on social media is sort of in many cases, a bastardization of the body positivity, where it's celebrating disease, where it's celebrating poor health. And I don't think that's the intention, or the pureness of the idea behind it. I think the idea behind it is very good, you know. And so, but what we're seeing is, we're seeing people being gluttonous, and they're eating, oh, this is what I eat in the day, and they're eating, you know, a bunch of cakes and a bunch, you know, a whole pizza and all, and like celebrating, and just, you know, extremely fat to the point of being extremely unhealthy, and then celebrating that and saying, oh, this is body positivity. But that's not really what's going on there. That's some kind of denial, or some kind of you know, manipulation. You know, what I'm talking about, body positivity, or there's another you know, there's a group called Health at Every Size. The point being is that there is no ideal, there is no physical aesthetic that is the goal. Okay. And so, and that's what fitness depends upon, is like in fitness, or I should say the fitness industry is like, oh, you need to look like this guy, and you need to, you know, so females need to look like this kind of woman, and males need to look like this kind of man, and so you have young people who are confused by this manipulation, saying, oh, if you're a boy, you need to be, have a big chest and big arms. And if you're a female, you need to, have a certain curves or certain proportions. And it's like, well, no, you don't. And then the counter to that, or the correction of that, is this kind of bastardized body positivity, where it's going way in the other direction, where it's like, okay, we're going to celebrate being gluttonous. That's also out of balance. Okay, what I'm saying is, you have your body right now, okay, and we're all different. You can be tall, you can be short, you can be thick, you can be thin. You're going to have different strengths and different weaknesses, okay? If you're not happy with yourself, try to understand why. Is it because of the pressure of society, where society says, oh, you don't look the right way, you need to look more like this? Or is it have more to do with the way you feel? Because the way you feel should be the guide, not what the magazines and the billboards are trying to, in this marketing, this propaganda of the marketing, to try to shape the consciousness to where, okay, this is the Uberman, right? And this is the, no, so we have to be really clear in our own thinking about ourselves and pay attention to the feeling. Do you feel good? Because if you don't feel good, well, okay, now that's a really good indication and guide that you need to make some changes so that you feel better. And when you start making those small changes and you start moving that direction, just like anything else, the momentum will build over the weeks. And before you know it, now it becomes a habit. And you had a habit of not moving and eating really poorly, and then you make some changes and you start moving a little bit, and then you come back and you move a little more, and then after 3-4 weeks, now you're in the practice of it and you're feeling good, and the endorphins and the body hormones are circulating, and you're feeling more happy and more confident and more fulfilled, and then you just keep ratcheting it up. Before you know it, a year down the road, now you have a positive addiction of exercise, right, or fitness. And that needs to be the guide, is how we feel, not comparing ourselves to other people, which is the habit of society. And that's what fitness industry takes advantage of, that. And again, because it becomes an industry where the focus is on making a profit, and that's never where the focus should be, because the abundance is there. It's already there. The focus needs to be on the service. The focus needs to be on, okay, you're going to be a coach or a trainer or a teacher or a professor. Your position is one of leadership, and so you're there to serve. And that means to help. But I say serve because it's like, you can't help people. You can only help those who would help themselves. So that's why I say service. I'm here to serve and help those who will help themselves, because I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you good information, and I'm going to show you the way, but you're going to do the work. Right? You can't pay somebody to do the work for you. And, so anyway, the point is that you can be slender and unhealthy and unhappy, and you can be fat and be healthy and happy, and all different combinations of that. So the visible form does not tell the whole story, and it should not be the center of your, that you got to look a certain way. And even the terminology, we have this term obese. Well, that's a very injurious term. It's an insult, and it's a way of it's a form of prejudice. It's a form of racism towards fat people, or whatever you want to call it. It's a form of prejudice. And where that came from is, it came from the insurance companies. When the insurance companies made the body mass index, like in the 1940s, where you have a certain score based on your body weight as compared to your height. Okay. And so you have a score, and anyone that's higher than 30 is said to be obese. Right. And so, that's because now we're not supposed to say fat, but fat is a more honest description than obese. Obese is like saying that you have a disease. Well, you may or may not. Just because someone is fat, it doesn't mean they're unhealthy. It may, okay, but you need to know more than just what you're looking at. You need to understand, and there's something called genetics. A lot of people are trying to deny deny the reality of genetics. We have this newer term called epigenetics, right? Where they're saying, well, we can't manipulate the genetics, but we can manipulate the epigenetics through our lifestyle and through our habit. Well, both are simultaneously true, but we cannot deny genetics, okay? Because let's not talk about fatness or obesity. Let's talk about height. Can you change your height because of your habits? No. Okay. If you're 5'6", you're not going to be 6'6" because of your habits, right? You're 5'6" because of the bloodline and the combination of factors, your parents and their parents, right? And maybe it had to do with other, definitely had to do with other things, the nutrition when you were in vitro. So there's other factors but nevertheless, the body you have is the body you have. So if you have thin bones or you have thick bones, it's a big difference. If you descend from individuals that are all really big people, you're going to be a big person. Yeah. So not all slender people are alike. Not all heavy set people are alike. Some can be healthy, some can be unhealthy. You can look at athletes that are fat. I mean, in NBA, Charles Barkley was a famous basketball player. He's a fat guy. Okay, but he's the best athlete out there, better than all you other bodybuilding, with the ripped six pack, and he's a better athlete, and he can do everything better. So, is it? How can you say that just because someone is big that they have a disease, and so anyway, that's kind of going in a different direction, but I just wanted to make the point that fitness needs to mature. The fitness industry needs to mature. Stop manipulating people by capitalizing on their fears, or by capitalizing on society's standard of what a man or woman should look like, and really pay attention to just the service part of helping. So if you come to me and you're a fat person and you say, I don't feel good, in this body, I feel like I have too much body weight and I want to get rid of fat. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that. And there's specific things we can do through, there's no secrets. It's like you got to put out more than what comes in, right? You got to expend more calories than what you're consuming. So you got to look at what you're eating, and you got to look at your energy output, and you got to manipulate those. And there's easy ways to do that. It still comes down to choice. It still comes down to self-discipline and commitment to stick to some plan of progress. And there's a lot of dishonesty still around that, because you have people selling diet pills and selling these short-term fixes, or even like the 8-week, a 12-week weight loss program. Well, that's 12 weeks out of your life. So if that person is spent the last 30 years developing certain habits, and now you're going to say that in 12 weeks they're going to lose a lot of weight, and then now the program's over, what do you think is going to happen? The body has a set point. You're going to go back to where you were unless you develop the self-discipline. So it has to be more than just buying the program, because what do you do when the program's over? Now it's like, right, you got to educate. That's why I say it's physical education. The education is of huge importance because ultimately the best coach and the best trainer uh, is so good that the client no longer needs them after a period of time because they've
Yeah.
taught them. And now you have the empowerment. It's about self-empowerment, you know, and then if the client wants to stay, it's because of the relationship. It's not because they don't know what to do anymore. They know what to do, but they enjoy your company, or there's some other maybe non-physical you know, aspect to the relationship that they value. And you would give them inspiration, you give them motivation, and so they want to continue to, you know, to pay you to train them. But it
I
should
think
not
that
be
what
because you
you're,
keep them in the dark.
yeah, I think like you went into so much nuance there, which is fantastic, just about the, aesthetics, whether you want to be, stick thin or you're overcorrecting and being, the negative side of body positivity. But I think it comes down to, yeah, like teaching people the skills so then they actually have that empowerment over their bodies and their minds. And then as you said, you have that, it's yourself, you have it, you don't need anything else, which I think it's a massive skill to master. And I really liked how you said the focus is on, focusing on a skill, but then the base, you're looking at the gait, the posture, and the breath. Like that's kind of how that's like your base, and then you're focusing on, maybe I'm going to do kettlebell swings, where's everything here, where's my gait, where's my posture, where's my breath. So I really like that framework. I think that's a really great framework to grasp. um I'm conscious of your time, mate, so I want to just finish with some rapid fire questions, and then we'll wrap things up, okay? Because you've been very generous already, okay?
Absolutely, Connor. Thank you.
Awesome, mate. So if you could pick anyone in the world to sit down and share a dinner with for 3 hours, who would it be and why?
If I could pick anyone in the world, living or dead,
Let's go
throughout
with living.
history, or they have to be alive.
Yeah, you can do both.
Um, I'd probably off the top of my head, I think Mike Tyson would be a, you know, really interesting. I'd like to spend a little time with Mike Tyson.
Yeah, he'd have some
Yeah.
stories.
You know, I think that he's a good example of an individual who has really redefined himself over time, and he's been in the public eye for so long that we've got to kind of ride along and watch the journey, which is unique. You know, most of us don't have, you know, almost none of us have the level of notoriety to where people, you know, they might know who you are in a certain segment, but, you know, to be in the spotlight for the whole time. You know, the guy was a despicable human being. He was an incredible fighter, an incredible technician, but, you know, seemingly was a really bad guy. And, you know, I hate, you know, like you're either a fan, you loved him or you hated him, but he's like, I'm going to eat your children. This crazy, you know. And then he kind of went through this transition where he's seems like a completely different person, where but he's very honest about it, you know, where he speaks about how he, you know, is ashamed, or, you know, of the person he was, and he doesn't want to be, you know, he doesn't associate with that person. He doesn't, you know, celebrate that person. And, you know, and he's become more humble. He's become more compassionate, you know, and I think that's, you know, quite interesting. And I think that he has a certain amount of wisdom that is quite unique based on the, you know, the level of fame, and that it didn't break him, that it broke him, but then he came back and rebuilt himself.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
a
so
really good point.
there's a story there that is, you know, quite an inspirational of the, you know, you started from nothing, you had it all, you lost it all, and then you did it again, you know,
Hero's
but
journey.
a kinder, gentler version. But still, he's still the same, you know, badass that he was. Like he didn't lose the skills, right?
Mm,
So yeah.
right. Awesome. For what in life are you most grateful for?
uh I have a lot to be grateful for. I'm, definitely grateful for my children, and their family. Um, my children are really well adapted. They're all doing their own things. They followed their own path. They have success. They're kind. They're polite. They're kind. They're helpful. They're caring. Also hardworking. Have skills. So that's, family is at the foundation, of everything. I'm grateful for my health. I get to do the things I love. I'm blessed to be healthy and vital. Grateful for my relationship with my girlfriend. She's taught me so much. Super inspirational woman, and I'm really grateful to have a person that understands me and that helps me to feel more complete than I would be, on my own. Grateful for my training partners, in the jujitsu. You have sometimes you're the hammer, sometimes you're the nail, and you need to have people that push you and put you in uncomfortable situations so that you have to face hardships and develop solutions to those difficulties, because that's a parable for life, and I get to basically do that on the daily on the jiu-jitsu mats with people that, we all have the same goal. It's the relentless pursuit of better. And, that's really important, to have a team of like-minded individuals, and grateful for my profession, the fact that I get to do what I love, the fact that I get to have a positive impact and serve humanity, move myself forward and help to move others forward towards a stronger and more fit, more healthy, more balanced society. So yeah, a lot of gratitude for
Love
all
it,
the,
mate.
yeah.
Great, mate. Last question. If you could put something on a billboard on Times Square to reach millions, even billions of people, what would it be and why?
I would put breathe and relax, and then I'd put my contact information on the bottom,
We got a lot of work there.
because we have to breathe, we have to be present, and in that, and relax, and in that, we are able to consolidate all the forces of the universe within ourselves. And in that moment, if everyone sees that and everyone breathes and relax at the same time, we're going to have this harmonic convergence where the world has a moment of peace. And I'm going to leave my contact because I want to help them, and I want to help all you, and teach you the ways, and be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem.
I love it, mate. Steve, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man. And yeah,
It's been a
just I've
pleasure
learned a
talking to
ton.
you.
I've learned a ton. The biggest thing I think that came across is your compassion and empathy. So you're definitely you can tell you've been coaching for almost 40 years, because it's not, your way or the highway. It's about what's going to fit the person and in each individual and make it work for them. So
Thank you.
I really appreciate it, mate. Where can we send people to learn more about what you do?
Uh, I'll give you two resources. My website is ikff.com. Just hit the contact button there to send me a message. And then if you're on the socials, Instagram, and that's Steve Cotter, IKFF.
Awesome, mate. I'll
And
link them in
that's
the show
my,
notes as well.
easiest way to get a hold of me, is just send me a message there. And I'll engage.
Amazing, mate. I'll link all that in the show notes. Okay.
Appreciate that.